Lead us in your truth and teach us, for you are the God of our salvation. For you we wait all day long. Amen. Luke 1, beginning at verse 5. In the time of King Herod of Judea, there was a priest named Zachariah, who belonged to the priestly division of Abijah. His wife Elizabeth was also a descendant of Aaron. Both of them were upright in the sight of God, observing all the Lord's commandments and regulations blamelessly. But they had no children, because Elizabeth was barren, and they were both well along in years. Once, when Zachariah's division was on duty and he was serving as priest before God, he was chosen by lot, according to the custom of the priesthood, to go into the temple of the Lord and burn incense. And when the time for the burning of incense came, all the assembled worshippers were praying outside. Then an angel of the Lord appeared to him, standing at the right side of the altar of incense. When Zachariah saw him, he was startled and was gripped with fear. But the angel said to him, "Do not be afraid, Zachariah. Your prayer has been heard. Your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son, and you are to give him the name John. He will be a joy and delight to you, and many will rejoice because of his birth, for he will be great in the sight of the Lord. He is never to take wine or other fermented drink, and he will be filled with the Holy Spirit even from birth. Many of the people of Israel will he bring back to the Lord their God, and he will go on before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah, to turn the hearts of the fathers to their children, and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord." Zechariah asked the angel, "How can I be sure of this? I am an old man, and my wife is well along in years." The angel answered, "I am Gabriel. I stand in the presence of God, and I have been sent to speak to you and to tell you this good news. And now you will be silent and not able to speak until the day this happens, because you did not believe my words, which will come true at their proper time." Meanwhile, the people were waiting for Zechariah and wondering why he had stayed so long in the temple. When he came out, he could not speak to them. They realized he had seen a vision in the temple, for he kept making signs to them, but remained unable to speak. When his time of service was completed, he returned home. After this, his wife Elizabeth became pregnant, and for 5 months remained in seclusion. "The Lord has done this for me," she said. "In these days he has shown his favor and taken away my disgrace among the people." People of God, this is the word of the Lord. So Advent, you know, perhaps is the season when we remember the coming salvation in the birth of Jesus Christ. And kind of, I guess, to assist us on our spiritual journey through Advent, we focus during Advent, our Sunday morning worship services, on the coming of Emmanuel. We light Advent candles. There are opportunities like tonight's Christmas Carol Sing. And during Advent, you can pick up an Advent devotional and work through that as an individual or a family. And during Advent, we kind of build up our longing to eventually gather at Christmas to behold the miracle of Jesus' birth, of God becoming flesh. And you are probably not expecting the church part of Advent to cause you a great deal of stress. At the same time that the church is inviting you to prepare for Christ's advent, the rest of society is saying it's time to prepare for a holiday called Christmas. And so in the weeks ahead, you will likely buy presents. You will wrap presents. Maybe you will even mail some presents. You will be decorating a house and perhaps a tree. You'll be attending parties. Maybe you'll even be hosting a party. You'll send out cards, or maybe you'll make some travel plans. You'll be reunited perhaps with some family. There'll be some baking, and they'll be preparing of holiday meals. And rumor has it that all of this can be a little bit stressful. Now, this is the part of the sermon where I'm expected to say that you shouldn't get obsessive with the stressful holiday preparations. You should just focus on the calming preparations for Advent at church. But I think that would be a significant mistake. And I think that would distort the purpose of Christ's coming for at least two reasons. The first is that Jesus will be at all of those parties that you will attend. He'll be at the tree that you decorate. He will be at the table in your home. And certainly he will be at the Advent worship services in church. And his coming transforms a holiday into a holy day. And he can certainly be found in the most stressful of moments that lie ahead. But there's also a second reason that we can't separate the spiritual from the stressful. And that's that when true worship happens, well, it's often actually stressful. The worship services during Advent are not meant so much to relieve us of stress, but to help us recover our greatest longing in life. And if that isn't stressful, I certainly don't know what is. See, Zechariah was a priest, an old priest who had no children. I mean, sure, he had an important job, right? Sure, he and his wife Elizabeth came from a very prominent family, and sure, they lived, according to the scriptures, righteous lives. But there was something missing, namely a child. Now, today, people sometimes choose to have children or choose not to have children, and there's not much social judgment in that. If people want to have children and cannot, sometimes they can resort to certain medical procedures, they can adopt, they can redirect their life goals, and all those are challenging and painful, but they are possible. But those options weren't available at all to Zechariah and Elizabeth. They lived in a society whose highest goal was to have children in order to keep the family name alive and in order to keep the covenant with God alive. So when Luke tells us that Zechariah and Elizabeth were getting on in years and they were still by themselves, Luke's not just telling us that they don't have any children. He's also telling us that they don't have any hope. And I think it's probably a pretty safe bet to say they started praying as soon as they discovered they were having a hard time getting pregnant. And as a priest, every time Zechariah would enter and offer a sacrifice, he watched his prayers rise into the skies like smoke that disappeared. And as the years piled up, so did the prayers. But still there was no child. Now, no doubt some of the family friends offered some explanations, and some of the explanations may have been technical. You should try a new technique. You should try harder. You should try relaxing. Don't work so hard. Maybe some of the explanations were more religious. Maybe there's something wrong in your relationship with God. Maybe his judgment's upon you. But the text says they were blameless. How often does the Bible say something like that about someone? Others maybe offered, well, it's God's will, And of course, I think we know that can be a completely useless and a completely hurtful and an arrogant bit of advice for mortals to be offering. We have no idea of God's will in this situation. And so some of the explanations also were probably kind of despairing, right? Don't worry about it, they'd say. You have your health, and, Zach, he's got a great job. Now, I think this couple was grateful for the blessings that they did have, but they still likely would have given it all away for a child. And so the story of Advent really begins with longing. Again, the primary reason we gather for worship during Advent is to renew our sense of great longing in our lives. In part, that's because most of the things that we do to hurt ourselves, we do because we're trying to avoid our deepest yearnings. So we work too hard. Or we transfer our longings onto our children, and we mess up their lives with too much pressure. Or we rush into bad relationships and make impulsive decisions. Or we numb the pain with pornography. or by abusing alcohol or food. Or we just become mean and cynical in our disappointment with yearnings that we can't face anymore. We thought that the busyness of the season was the problem. But in worship, what we do is we kind of bracket the busyness long enough to realize that we're using that busyness to kind of suppress our deepest longings, which are so dangerously apparent during this season. The whole world is talking about hope and peace and joy and love. And we can't hear those words without feeling those old yearnings coming to the surface again and again. Not wanting to deal, of course, with the cost of the disappointment of it all, we find ourselves frantically busy during the season. And so, ironically, we would rather prepare for hope than have it. But the longing won't go away. Maybe your longing is for intimacy. I mean, maybe you've even been married for a long time and you still yearn for this. Or maybe the intimacy you long for, that you're looking for, is with a true friend who will know you and who will still love you. Or maybe your longing is for health. You just want a day when you're not thinking about your body and a body that doesn't work well. Or maybe you have a dream that is your longing. You've learned how to make money, but now you want to make a life. And you want to make a difference with it, and you can't quite meet that dream. Or maybe your dream has really taken a beating over the years. Maybe the dream was for a family. I mean, you love the family that you have. You're grateful for it, but it's not exactly what you dreamed. Or maybe, like Zachariah and Elizabeth, you've decided that this longing is not going to be realized. What if the thing for which you yearn is something that you cannot have? What if you're longing for a better past? What if you're longing for a little bit more time with a loved one who has already died? What if you're longing not to have made the mistakes that you did? What if you're longing for the health that you had when you were young? Just because these yearnings, these longings are impossible to fulfill, doesn't prevent us from yearning for them still. And what is the point of longing when you're getting on in years, as Zachariah and Elizabeth were? Well, Zachariah coped with his disappointment by keeping busy as a priest. And doesn't in some ways that strategy kind of make the most sense? Again, isn't that why we knock ourselves out again and again? That's why we'll knock ourselves out probably over the next few weeks. But this season we find again that God enters into our busyness. God appears to Zechariah the priest, and the first thing that God does is he renews this unrealistic longing. Remember, Elizabeth and Zechariah are considered disgraced because they have no child. To be disgraced means to be removed from the means of God's grace. And to be graced means to receive something from God. When we receive grace from God, we receive not necessarily what we want, and certainly not what we deserve, but we receive what we need. And what we need most of all is to live in a world that's filled with God's presence. In such a world, many things can happen. Sins and failures can actually be redeemed. New beginnings can still occur. And those tattered old prayers that lie around on the floor of your soul can still be answered, but not necessarily in the way that we may have imagined. Now, isn't it fascinating that Zechariah the priest was praying inside the temple, and all the people were joining him in prayer outside the temple, and the angel Gabriel appears to say, okay, stop praying. You've got it. Right? And then the terrified priest can only say, well, how can this be? How can this be? And at some level, I think I understand that. I think we are more accustomed to praying and asking than we are to receiving. Zechariah, in fact, is really the embodiment of Israel's longing for a Messiah who would save them. This is a longing that goes all the way back to Abraham.